My guest today is Andrew Keel. Andrew is a real estate investor whose real estate portfolio currently includes 17 manufactured housing communities or mobile home parks across 6 states: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Tennessee. His expertise is in turning around undermanaged parks to maximize lot occupancy and reduce operating expense. He does this by bringing in homes to fill vacant lots, implementing utility billback programs, and improving overall operating efficiency to increase park net operating income, or NOI. He often moves on site during the initial months post-acquisition to implement his management turnaround plan in a hands-on way. So I invited Andrew to the podcast today to share insights and learnings about how to successfully invest in mobile home parks as an asset class. Thanks so much for joining us today, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'd love to start just by learning a little bit more about your background. How did you get started in mobile home park investing?
It's a crazy story, and never would I have thought that I would end up in the trailer park business. But so I started out. I worked in sales at a marketing and branding firm down here in Orlando, Florida. Eventually, on the side, I started dabbling into real estate. Bought a couple single-family rentals, and was managing those. And knew early on that I wanted to be a landlord. My grandfather he had a nice portfolio of rentals up in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa area, and that's where my whole family is from, both my mom and my dad's side. So I knew I wanted to be a landlord. I started, I had the couple of single family houses. I met a wholesaler down here in Orlando that was, finding off market deals. And I was really intrigued, by his whole, business model. So I ended up leaving the marketing firm and going full time with this wholesaler. And I learned, about how to market for deals, from bandit signs to yellow letters, you name it. I was completely dialed into that. And I assigned, probably, I would say about 15 to 20 deals a year. And then I also would go ahead and do the full renovations probably 4 times a year. I was only doing maybe 4 flips a year. So I did that for a couple years. And then off of a yellow letter that I had sent out, I got a lead on 2 individual manufactured houses up in Ocala, Florida, which is just a couple hours drive from Orlando, where I was from. So I didn't know how to make money on these things, but I just knew that the pricing was really good. It was $2,200, and I could buy both of them. And they were vinyl sided, shingle roof manufactured houses from the 90s. And I was like, there has to be a way to make money on these things. So I went online and typed into YouTube how to make money with mobile homes, right? I figured that was the best place to start. And I found an awesome guy named Lonnie Scruggs, who was teaching a class on creating mailbox money through investing in mobile homes. And subsequently, I read his book, Deals on Wheels, which is a great book on, creating temporary cash flow off of, buying mobile homes, fixing them up a little bit, and then selling them on contract, for like those 2 we bought for $2,200. We fixed them up a little bit, made them marketable, and then put them up on Craigslist and sold them for $2,000. I think one sold for $2,000 down, the other one sold for $3,000 down, and then like $250 a month for 5 years. So we did those deals, and they were fantastic. They created good income. So I scaled it, and I was like, all right, I need to start focusing on this. There's something about these mobile homes. I can't believe the demand for these things. And I put it up on Craigslist, and I had like 24 people reach out to me in 2 days. It was insane. So I was like, there's something in this affordable housing business at that time. So I did 19 more of those manufactured home, like mobile home, sell it on contract deals. And then I met a mobile home park owner in the process. And, that seemed like the logical next step in the ladder is, hey, if I could own, an entire park, that would obviously be fantastic. But I thought, you got to be a millionaire to be able to do that. I was just getting started in real estate, had a couple single family rentals, and I was flipping a couple with hard money. So, I didn't have a lot of liquid cash at the time. And then he told me, he said, hey, the real wealth is built through owning the real estate. There's tax benefits to that with depreciation. You can scale easier with the financing available, to purchase these assets. And you can also bring in partners so that you don't have to bring all the money yourself. And that was like a huge aha moment for me. I ran home. I put on my refrigerator with dry erase marker that my goal was to buy a mobile home park in 2016. And unfortunately, I did not end up buying a park in 2016, but I was glued in at that point, and my education started. I went to the Mobile Home Park University boot camp. I went to another mobile home park seminar, like a 3-day seminar. I did some online courses, and then I read Trailer Cash by Jamie Smith several times, and just got glued in to mobile home parks and investing in them. I started doing some marketing for mobile home parks, direct to owners, like I was doing through my wholesaling business. So I was mailing out yellow letters, I was cold calling, and through a cold call, I actually got my first deal, which was in Edwardsville, Illinois, Quail Run, and it was 67 lots in a nice, metro of St. Louis. So ended up contacting some of the people that I went to the MHU boot camp with, and one of them reached out and ended up funding the deal, putting the money up, and I was the sweat equity partner. I did put a little money in that first deal, but yeah, the rest is history. We that initial park, I was very hands-on with the whole project management of it. Ended up being a home run. Since then, we've done 4 more deals with that same investor. I've also done syndications. We bought a 5-park portfolio in 2018, and we syndicated a couple $1 million from about 18 investors, and I've done a couple other syndications since then as well. So we're now up to 17 communities, and we have 5 more that should be closing in the next 60 days. So we're well on our way, and really love the asset class. We've taken several assets through the full business cycle, where we've refinanced, paid back the initial debt, and now are just paying distributions to our investors, and everybody's really happy. So it's been a great ride.
Wow. So it sounds like you are definitely firing on all cylinders right now. I want to definitely jump into that first deal in some detail in a moment. But first, I wanted to ask, so it sounds like the concrete actions you were taking to start investing, where you started getting educated, even just starting with YouTube videos, then attending some seminars, meeting some folks, and then you started just cold letter writing to park owners. Have I got that right?
Yeah. I mean, really just diving in and becoming obsessed with everything that hit, the hit online, or any sort of content I can get my hands on.
How did you even identify or locate park owners? Like, do you just Google for the names, or how did you even know who to send the letters to?
Yeah, so initially it was just Google searches. I would type in, mobile home park owners or mobile home parks in Omaha, Nebraska. I was very specific on like the areas I wanted to purchase in. And then I would generate a list, of all of the addresses, the where they got their tax bill at, that address, and I would mail out letters to those, and also cold call, just call through the list. I eventually hired a VA to assist with the calling and appointment setting, and that helped us scale quite a bit.
Got it. Cool. So you started with single family homes. Now it sounds like you're all in on mobile home park investing. How does mobile home park investing differ from other buy and hold strategies like single family homes or even multifamily investing? And what makes mobile home park investing especially attractive compared to these other niches in your mind?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing is supply and demand. They're not making very many new mobile home park developments. I think I saw something the other day that on average there's about 5 to 10 mobile home parks that are developed every year, and there's about 100 mobile home parks that are torn down and redeveloped into a higher and better use, whether that be multifamily or something else. So there's a shrinking number of these assets, and so there's a shrinking supply and a very high demand. Affordable housing is in very dire need, and you can put a mobile home up on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, and you'd be very surprised at how many people would reach out to you with an interest in renting or buying that unit. So that's the first reason why I like the asset class is that equation. There's there's several other reasons, including there's really good financing available through the agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Mm.
The maintenance on a mobile home park is a lot less compared to a single family rental where you're responsible if the AC unit goes out. You're responsible if the refrigerator's leaking. There's a squeaky window that water gets inside of the unit when it rains. There's a lot of maintenance costs to keep up with. Where in our mobile home parks, we don't own the individual homes. Our goal is just to own the land underneath of them. So our expense ratios are a lot lower, near 30% of the gross income that we're bringing in. And it's more scalable. We're able to acquire more assets with fewer, a smaller management team. So those are a couple reasons why. There's several others, but those are some big ones.
Why is the supply shrinking?
Well, there's mobile home parks in very good areas. Like in downtown Austin, Texas, there was a mobile home park, and it just made sense based off of the numbers to make all the tenants leave, tear down the mobile home park, and build a 50-story apartment complex on top of that location. There's just higher and better uses for these properties that mobile home parks are present. So that's one of the reasons. Also, municipalities don't like these assets. It doesn't benefit them financially. It costs on average around 11 to 12 grand a year to put a kid through public school. And the tax revenue that the municipality receives off of a mobile home on average is around $100 a year. So it's just, from an economic standpoint, it's a loss leader for the municipalities.
Gotcha. Where does an investor who wants to get into this asset class actually go to look for mobile home park deals? Like, I know there's mobilehomeparkstore.com, but I suspect that's not where you're going to find attractive deals. So what are better strategies for finding opportunities?
Mobilehomeparkstore.com is a decent resource. I have bought a property off of that website. But other resources, all the commercial real estate websites, LoopNet, CoStar, some of the other ones are good aspects. But, we try to buy as many off market, direct to seller as possible. You cut down on the commission you're going to pay to a broker. And you usually can negotiate better deals with better terms. A lot of the mobile home parks right now, I think it's like 80 or 90% of the mobile home parks. There's about 44,000 mobile home parks in the country, and about 80 to 90% of those are owned by mom and pop owners. This is another reason why I like the asset class, is because these mom and pop owners are less sophisticated. They have owned the properties for a long time, and they usually have a lot of equity built up in these properties, so they can be more flexible when they sell. Out of the 17 mobile home communities that we own now, we got 5 of them with seller financing. So there's things like that you're able to negotiate. And they also, since they own these things free and clear, they leave meat on the bone. If you could, if a unit goes vacant, instead of spending $5 grand to rehab it and get it occupied again, they'll just leave it alone. They won't touch it. They'll just let it sit there because, when they were younger, they usually did the rehabs on the homes themselves. And now that they're in their 70s or 80s, they just don't have the energy for it. And they're still making a boatload of money, off of the other occupied units because they don't have the debt service that they once did. So there's a lot of room for improvement and NOI growth in these assets. And that's really one of the main reasons why I like the asset class, is because of that opportunity for the NOI growth and, increasing the ultimate value of the properties.
So it sounds like there's a lot of benefits to investing in mobile home parks. You mentioned shrinking and low supply, high demand, lower maintenance costs, really high cash flow. There's all these benefits. Economics would say capital would flow to where there's opportunity. Why isn't this asset class getting totally crowded? And there's still tons of investors. I think typically when you think of real estate investing, you're thinking of investing in a single family home or maybe a small multifamily, why don't all the dollars flow into mobile home park investing, or are they?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a lot of institutional money coming into the space. Uh, Typically, when those organizations come in, they need to spend a lot of money, so they go after the bigger assets. But yeah, there is demand is increasing for these assets, especially the larger ones over 100 lots. But also there is this stigma around mobile home parks that, I'll never forget the very first potential investor that I took out to lunch and showed that first deal in Edwardsville, Illinois. I put a business plan together, put a pro forma together, and this is like a family friend. He was like the wealthiest guy my family knew. He has the Maserati, the Ferrari, he has the nice house on the lake. And he fortunately had coached me in basketball when I was like a little boy. So he went out to lunch with me, and I said, "Hey, I got a business idea I want to run by you." So I sat down and I showed him all the numbers and everything, and they were great. I mean, the projected returns were well above 20% annually. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Andrew, I love you, man, but there's no way that I'm going to invest in a trailer park with you." And he just the sticker shock of owning that type of an asset scared him away. So there are some you know stigma people that won't invest in the space because it's not sexy, right? They can't go to the country club and tell their friends about it. They don't, it's not something they want to brag about. But once that deal went full cycle and we were able to purchase that park in Edwardsville and refinance within 18 months, the returns were off the charts, above 100% annually. So it worked out, but some people just aren't interested in the asset class, which is a good thing for us because it artificially will keep some people out of the asset class entirely, so that there's more room for the people that are in it.
How accurately or inaccurately is the stigma does it line up to reality?
As with any asset class, multifamily, single family, there is slumlords out there, that let the assets just kind of, disintegrate and they don't keep up with the maintenance. There's a lot of deferred maintenance on these things. And a lot of times it's not done on purpose. It's just mom and pop owners that are aging and they can't keep up with it anymore, and they're not used to hiring third-party contractors to complete these things. They're used to doing it themselves, including, trimming the trees, general cleanup around the property. So when they're not able to do that anymore, obviously the grade of the asset, goes down. So, I would say, yeah, there are some trailer parks that are the typical, you think of 8 Mile, you think of Trailer Park Boys, you think of like the bottom of the barrel. But then there's very nice communities as well, like Equity Lifestyle. They own a lot of 55 and older communities in coastal states that are, very nice subdivisions. And you can't even tell that the mobile homes are mobile homes. They look like actual residential, stick built houses. So, same in apartments. Apartments have, D and F grade assets, and they have A grade assets. So it just it depends on many factors and how they're cared for.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So you touched upon a little while ago about how there's financing. There's often good financing for mobile home parks. How does loan financing work for parks, and what kind of banks lend to park investors?
Sure. So financing available, there's usual regional banks, the bank on the corner, near the property usually will lend on the property, but that will be recourse debt, meaning that, hey, if you don't pay the loan, that, they're going to come back and take your house and your cars and everything. And then there's also agency debt, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which is the best debt possible in the asset class. Usually 10 or 12-year fixed rates. Right now rates are 3 to 4%, 30-year amortization, interest only for 1 to 3 years. So it's and those are non-recourse. So there's really good debt available. Typically on the assets that we purchase, they're value add properties, so they need some work. So we'll use the local regional bank to purchase it, and spend money improving the asset, getting occupancy above 90%, to meet the requirements that agency debt requires, and then refinance through agency debt, to buy and hold long term.
So it sounds like the loan terms for park investments don't differ so much from your traditional mortgage on a single family or multifamily asset, and may in some cases may even be more attractive. Is that accurate, such as the interest only for 1 to 3 years?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the grade of the asset. If it has curbs and gutters and, paved off street parking, you'll get better debt compared to a property that, just has asphalt roads and gravel parking pads. So, as with multifamily, it's the same way. The better quality asset, the better debt that you're able to acquire.
Cool, got it. All right, I'd love to jump into a bit of a deep dive into your first mobile home park deal. You touched upon this or alluded to it earlier, and it sounded like you found it from cold letter writing. That, if I recall, correct?
So it was actually off of a cold call.
Hmm.
The first park was, and uh, I mean it was 67 lots, 5 states away. So I had to get comfortable real quick with managing these assets from a distance. And luckily, some of the seminars I had gone to had basically been set up that way from the start. Is this is how you manage these assets from a distance. But yeah, so it's Quail Run Mobile Home Park in Edwardsville, Illinois. It's on my website. Uh, but we bought that in June 2017 off of a cold call. I actually was calling to get lot rent comps for a park down in southern Missouri. And the park manager said, "Hey, I think the owners of this park, they're not interested in selling the one in Missouri, but they would be interested in selling the one up in Illinois." And I said, "Okay, well, great. Yeah, pass my information along, or let me get on the phone with them and let's talk about it." And we did, and we came to terms on a nice price, about a 10 cap, and it was 67 lots. I think there was 58 occupied, so we had to come in, bring in some homes, and then we had had 2 homes that we needed to rehab and get occupied as well. So we did that. We also billed back for utilities because the utilities was included in lot rent, ultimately increasing the NOI. And, we invested it initially. If you'd like, I can go through the numbers.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that'd be great.
yeah, the initial equity was 400,000. We did get financing, 75% LTV on that deal, and it was recourse debt for both partners. It was myself and the investor, and we got that through a local bank. It was a 25-year amortization. Interest rate was 5.25%, and it was fixed for 5 years. That was what through the local bank. We ended up taking, that was June 2017, we closed. December 2018, we took a cash flow distribution just off of the excess cash flow of 85 grand. We ended up doing a refinance April 18th of 2019, and the investors received $783,917.17 from the refinancing event, because the property had appraised at quite a bit higher than it did when we purchased it after we did the improvements. And then at the refinancing event, we also took a $65,000 cash flow distribution. So in summary, we took the 85,000 cash flow distribution in December 2018. At the refinance, April 2019, we took out about 783,000, along with a 65,000 cash flow distribution. So the total distributions were like 933,000, and we were able to repay the initial equity out of that, and then the return was 533,000, and that was all done in 1.8 years. So the ROI was 74.15% annualized cash on cash. So that obviously is not a typical deal. Obviously, not every deal is like that, but very thankful that was my first property, and ultimately what got me hooked on the business model, and encouraged me to go deeper.
So it sounds like, if I was just like jotting some notes down as you were walking us through that, it sounds like purchase price was 1.6 million, and a quarter of that was a sponsor investment from you and your partner, and then the three-quarters of that was bank debt. Is that correct?
Actually, so the purchase price on this one was 1.34 million, and the initial equity included improvements. So the amount that we raised, the 400,000, was down payment money, closing costs, and money to bring in homes to fill vacant lots.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So when you saw this property, what was the opportunity that you saw, and like what did you envision that you would be doing um, to improve the property and increase NOI? Did you have a clear, um, I guess, a clear point of view on that from the very beginning?
Yeah, I mean it was pretty simple, right? We needed to fill the vacant lots, which I think there was 9 vacant lots that we needed to bring homes in and put on those lots, and we needed to bill back for the water sewer that was included in lot rent, and then we needed to raise lot rent. Lot rent was below market because the mom and pops, they hadn't raised rent in about 5 years, so that was our value add, which was in our pro forma. And luckily we were able to get boots on the ground and find homes to fill those vacant lots pretty quickly, and that ultimately helped us execute the business plan.
Can you talk a little bit about the negotiation process when acquiring the park? Were there challenges you faced? How did the dynamics play out?
Yeah, great question. So the owners, were mom and pops. They were really set. They wanted a 9 cap value on the property. We did a lot of research, and during our on-site due diligence, we found that a portion of the roads had some deferred maintenance. They needed some work, and the trees needed to be trimmed. And during our plumbing inspection, we found that the water lines that were close to where the main comes into the park, uh, the PSI that was read on those lines was like over 100 PSI. So we were able to renegotiate to get a reduction for the additional items that were needed, including putting a pressure relief valve on the main so that the PSI could be closer to 30 or 40, which is where you want it to be.
Got it. And a bit earlier, you talked about how you had to um, get comfortable with this notion of managing 5 states away. Can you talk a little bit about how things have to change, or just systems you have to put in place to manage at a distance 5 states away? Because I imagine that is going to be different than managing, a half an hour drive away.
Yeah, so in all of our properties, we have an on-site manager that is basically our eyes and ears, and they live in the community. So, they help us with several different tasks, but mainly it's, being our eyes and ears in the community. Uh, so that really helps us. We use a couple softwares like Trello and Slack to communicate, and those are, help us be very, they help us get a lot done, and instead of just making phone call and text, and it helps us keep things organized. Uh, but yeah, I mean, there is a lot of stuff that has to be done offsite, from the accounts payable to bookkeeping to, collections and keeping track of the water sewer usage and making sure that there's not a leak and so forth. So offsite management is pretty intensive, and we're very, very, very hands-on. And I think that's, why we can manage, these projects so successfully, is because we have our hands on the pulse of the property at all times.
So when you look at your portfolio today, excuse me, today, how regularly do you actually go and visit your parks in person these days?
Yeah, we go once a quarter. That's like a requirement for ours, that we have to check that box. So somebody, whether it's me or one of the asset managers, will visit the parks at least once a quarter. I probably go twice a year to the different properties. Uh, so that's a good gauge. We are a little behind on those right now due to this COVID pandemic, but we plan to visit those just as soon as we can.
And when you go visit in person, are you driving all the streets to just, take a pulse of the maintenance and upkeep of the park? Is that what you're, more or less looking for?
Yeah, really two things. The first thing that I do a drive through of each community is I look for any liabilities. Sometimes I'll never forget, I was going to our park in Dayton, Ohio, and I was doing just a drive by, and usually we show up unannounced. We don't tell the on-site manager we're coming, uh, in hopes that we can see the property in its true form. If we tell them that, hey, we're going to be there on this date, a lot of stuff gets done. The grass gets mowed, the trash gets picked up, right before we get there. So usually we show up unannounced and do these quarterly visits just by surprise for the on-site manager. So I showed up in Dayton, Ohio, and there was an electrical line laying on top of one of the homes. So it had come from a telephone pole and had over time, sagged and was laying on top of a metal mobile home, and then went and connected to another set of lines. So, something like that, the on-site manager that's there every single day didn't think to mention to us. And we couldn't see that in the drive-through videos that she sends us every month. So me being able to drive there and see that, and while I was there, call the power company and have them come emergency, fix that, was very important. So I look for liabilities first. There's other things that follow that suit, but liabilities are the first thing I look for. Then I'll do another drive through and look at just general cleanup. And typically I'll take pictures of people that need to pick up trash, or if they have a refrigerator in their front yard, or tires on the side of their home. And we'll get those pictures and then send them to the tenant, and ask them nicely to get those picked up. And usually the on-site manager will issue violations after, if the tenant doesn't pick it up the first time when she asks them to.
So it sounds like in addition to going yourself in person once a quarter or twice a year, you are having the on-site manager actually drive around the park with video monthly. Do they just like put a GoPro on their car and just drive around?
Yeah, a GoPro, or there's like a Kodak cube, like a 360 cube that they can put on their car, and some of them walk and just walk through with their phone. But yeah, that's very important. And then we have someone review those and look for potential additional violations that need to be issued after looking at those every month.
Gotcha. Okay, so now when you're investing in parks, do you typically go through brokers, or are you able to make direct contact with sellers and not go through brokers? Well, like what's typical etiquette or practice in the industry with respect to working, through brokers?
Yeah, we cast a wide net, so we've done several deals with brokers. We've done, several without. We're always looking for deals through several different avenues. This is all we do. So we're always looking for another deal that we can be working on. But yeah, there is mobile home park specific brokers that you can go through, and different brokerage houses. And yeah, they're all very professional, and they know how to value these asset classes. So that is an option to go with. Um, but typically the ideal situation is to go direct to the owner.
Got it. So today, what do you look for when you are evaluating a new mobile home park deal? Like, what are the overall markers that indicate a park might be a good fit for your investing criteria?
Great. So my criteria might be different than someone looking to buy their first park, but we typically look for parks that are larger than 50 lots. We just find that those will move the needle enough for us to make the deal make sense. We look for parks that are on public utilities, meaning city water, city sewer. The infrastructure is a big deal for us, and for anybody looking to buy a mobile home park. The infrastructure is going to be very important. You're going to want to do a lot of due diligence on the water lines, the sewer lines, the gas lines. Is there natural gas available, or are the tenants going to have to go with propane tanks, to heat their homes? The electrical, how often is there a transformer? Is there a transformer every 4 to 6 homes, or is it daisy chained? Because that's it could be several thousands of dollars missed. So we do a lot of inspections. We pay money for those to make sure that these are good assets that are going to last. And public utilities are important. We also look for mobile home parks that have less than 25% park owned homes. Some mom and pops will have park owned homes that they keep and rent out, And that doesn't meet our business model, where we want to, just own the land and the tenants own their homes and pay lot rent. So, a lot of times we'll accept some, but we'll try to sell those homes off once we take ownership of the property. So yeah, those are a few things we look at, and we also do a lot of data on the demographics of the area. And we want to buy within a metropolitan area that has at least 50,000 population. And there's other metrics we look for in terms of the average home price in the area, the average household income, and if the population is trending upward or downward. So those are just a few things that we look at.
You mentioned this notion of city utilities. And I know this is like a big deal, whether the park is on private water and sewer or private sewage and or versus public city utilities. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important?
Yeah, it's going to come down to maintenance and liability. Like we have a property with a well, and we have a well operator that has to go to the property about 2 times a week. And then the on-site manager is responsible for reading the chlorine readings every day. So, there's additional liability there with the EPA, with the state and so forth for that property. So with that, you're going to have more costs. So your expense ratio may be 40 to 50% on a property that you have private utilities, compared to 30% on a property that you have city utilities, and the city takes care of all of that. So that's why it is more important. But yeah, we do own properties with septic tanks. We own properties with a well, and we own several with public utilities, and public utilities is just a much better asset if you can.
And you also mentioned that ideally you're looking for parks with less than a quarter park owned homes.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine that's because, then you're not on the hook for property taxes or, unclogging the toilet at 3 a.m. Are there other considerations for why you would rather not own the homes on top of the land?
Yeah, the biggest one is going to be turnover, right? We found that the turnover annually on the park-owned homes is around 40 to 50%, meaning that, hey, they rented a mobile home for a year and then they move out at the end of the lease and go into a different form of housing. Where on the tenant-owned homes, our turnover is only around 4 to 5% per year. So there's a lot less turnover, which results in a lot less expense. And that's the long-term business model that we want to follow.
Is that because the park owned versus tenant owned or resident owned home the two attract different profiles entirely, or just tenant quality is different? That's a 10x difference. That's quite significant. So I'm curious about your insight on what drives that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to affordability. For a park owned rental unit, depending on the market, you could be $500 to $800 a month that you're charging for straight rent. And for a lot rent, you may be charging $300 to $500 for just lot rent. So, it's just more affordable once they own the home for them to, make that monthly payment. And, I think that is a big differential for a lot of people.
Got it. Cool. So it sounds like you have lots of professionals who come in, diligence the property, all the infrastructure things that you mentioned. For somebody who's getting into this or who's interested in investing in mobile home parks and they're just learning about it, what are the biggest problems or maybe nightmare scenarios that can occur if you didn't do good diligence? Like, what is a park owner's worst nightmare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say it would come back to the utility infrastructure and something being wrong with that. I heard a horror story recently about a property owner that purchased a mobile home park that had a septic tank system, and they had a leach field that went with it. And the septic tank was leaking, and they knew that they had a leak, and the EPA was notified by a current tenant that the septic tanks were leaking. So the EPA came, inspected the property, gave the property owner a timeline to fix this issue. The property owner then went to the health department and found out that based off of the square footage of the new code, which if you're going to tear out the current septic system to do any sort of replacement or repair to it, you would have to bring the entire system up to the new code, which would require more square footage for a leach field, would require more septic tanks instead of just having one septic tank for the whole system. So he was trying to negotiate to somehow buy the land next door so we had more room for the additional square feet for the leach field that was required now by the health department. And he was not able to get that going quick enough. And ultimately, the EPA started charging him $10,000 a day, fining him for leaking the sewage from the septic tank into the ground. So that's obviously an extreme measure, but it just shows you the importance of doing proper due diligence and making sure you get the septic tanks pumped and inspected for leaks prior to owning them. And then also looking at the current health department codes to see, hey, if we do have an issue with this septic system, is there a way to connect to city sewer? Because that would be the ideal situation. If not, okay, what's the next best thing? Okay, we need to put in the new septic field that meets the current code. And do we have room for that leach field? So those are a couple things that you would want to look at, and I think that would be a worst case scenario type of deal.
All right, good tips there. What are key metrics you use to analyze a mobile home park deal, and also what cap rate do you personally need to make an investment successful?
Great question. So metrics, we'll look at the area, we'll look at the number of lots, how much lot rent is compared to what market lot rent is, and also we'll look at the P&L extensively. A lot of mom and pop owners have managers that they're paying a full-time salary to. We looked at one park that was the net operating income was 100,000, which looked like a decent deal. So we were able to tie it up for a 10 cap price of $1 million. And then once we dug in and got the P&Ls, we realized that the park owner was paying a manager $50,000 a year. So what we, the park manager is more of a very part-time position. It's less than 20 hours a week for our managers. So we're able to reduce that expense and increase the NOI, ultimately increasing the value. So mobile home parks are income properties. They're valued off of that income solely. So if you can cut an expense, you'll directly increase the NOI and the value of the property. What cap rates do we purchase at? It really depends on several factors. The type of debt that we can acquire on the property is very important for us. We usually look for a 3 or 4 point spread from the interest rate that we're able to acquire on the property to the cap rate that we pay. So if interest rates are 5%, we're looking at 8 or 9 caps or higher to make the deal work, because that'll get us a 20% cash on cash return on the investment.
Got it. Okay, really helpful. So you alluded to a little bit, but I just wanted to kind of hear maybe in more detail. What's this high level analysis that you do of the surrounding metro area? What are you looking for? I know you mentioned population at least 50,000. What are other sort of markers that you're looking for in the surrounding community, as well as in local government or city council, if that is important in your analysis?
Definitely. We use a website. There's several websites we use, but one of them is called bestplaces.net. And you can go on Best Places and it'll show you, demographic data about a specific, metro, about a specific zip code, and even, the city there as well. So we use that. We look for average home price of over 100,000. We look for average household income above 40,000. We look for homes. It has links on there to show homes that are for sale in the area. It has, job descriptions, like what sectors people live in, or what sectors people work in, whether it's manufacturing, service businesses or so forth, healthcare, education. So we look at all of that, and obviously more stable, employers like healthcare, education, so forth, are long staples that we like to invest in. So we look at those measures, and that plays a huge role, on if we invest into an area or not. So that's a good kind of gauge to look at.
Do you do any diligence on local government?
Yeah, to piggyback on that, we do a lot of extensive research. So we just had a property under contract in Texas, actually, that we had to cancel the contract because the local government was requiring, upon sale of the property, all of the parking pads to be paved, and they were currently gravel. So you're looking at a six-figure expense right off the bat. Had we had not contacted the local municipality to see what they were going to require to get the new mobile home park license and certificate of occupancy, we could have missed that, and that would have been a six-figure mistake that would obviously affect your returns. So we definitely check in with the local municipalities, see what their requirements are for obtaining the certificate of occupancy, and do our research there.
And when it comes to your turnaround plan, I know you mentioned you typically will, do things like utility bill back, bringing in, filling in vacant lots. What are other typical value add improvements that you do with a newly acquired park?
Sure. So, billing back for water sewer is a big one. Billing back for trash, or getting the trash company to bill the tenants directly. Changing the street lights to LED lights, will reduce your costs. Increasing lot rent, we don't believe in just doubling lot rent overnight, but doing modest rent increases to bring it up, over a course of a few years, to bring it up to what the market is very important. And then also, general cleanup around the property is usually needed, because there's always some deferred maintenance, whether it be trees that need to be trimmed or trash that's been left out, and the previous owners just haven't, implemented a violation policy where there's actually a fine involved. So things like that are all encompassing during our first 3 months on site.
Got it. And it sounds like you often will move on site. Is that still true, or do you now have teams that do this?
Yeah, so I have 4 asset managers that will move on site at new acquisitions and basically be the eyes and ears, running the projects, and then they'll hire an on-site manager that kind of is the on-hand person, while they're focused on infill and working with utility companies and so forth to sub-meter properties. So yeah, I have the project managers, and then I'll visit with them at least once a month to assist them, with different projects, or visit the properties myself.
So now your portfolio's, more than 1,000 lots, 17 parks, as we were talking about. How do you finance a portfolio this size? Are you raising outside capital from LPs now? Do you have lending relationships with specific banks or private money to finance the debt portion? Yeah, how does that work at this scale?
Yeah, so we don't have a fund at this point. It's something we've looked into doing, going into next year. But we have, done syndications where we'll bring a group of investors together and, show them a business plan and a pro forma on, a specific property, and the investors can choose if they'd like to invest in that asset or not. So, uh, you know, that's primarily how we fund our deals moving forward. And for the acquisition financing, typically the properties that we buy don't qualify for that agency debt just yet, because they have some hair on them at the beginning. They need to be cleaned up. They need, lot rents a little bit higher. They need occupancy above 90%. They need less than 20% park owned homes. They need, X, Y, and Z. So we usually go with a local bank for the initial acquisition financing. And then within 5 years, we'll aim to put better long-term agency debt on that asset.
Got it. Is your plan currently to just buy and hold your parks and not dispose of them after some holding period so that they just eventually become cash flowing assets? Or is your plan to eventually sell parks back? Like, what is, I guess, the agreement that you have with your syndication investors?
Yeah, great question. So we're in it for the long run. We're buy and hold investors. So with all of our deals, our business plan is to buy, fix up, refinance, and then hold long term and pay out distributions every quarter into perpetuity.
Hmm. Got it. Okay, cool. So, closing the last lap around this, what do you feel like are the most important skills that somebody needs to be successful in mobile home park investing, whether it's, ranging from finding leads to getting a deal done, turning around the property, managing tenants or park managers. What are the most important skills one needs to be successful at this?
Yeah, I would say, you need to have a baseline knowledge. I would recommend the MHU boot camp. That's probably the industry leading boot camp that someone could attend.
That's the Frank
Get
Rolfe one.
Frank Rolfe, yeah,
Yeah.
and Dave Reynolds. They have a nice program there. So I would recommend that. And then I would say, it takes a lot of persistence. It's not a very complex business. There's only a certain number of levers that you need to pull, but you need to be persistent with them, and you need to, hold your on-site managers accountable, and you need to be consistent. And if you can do that, you'll be very successful in the space.
What do you feel like has been your superpower that's made you successful in acquiring your portfolio? And maybe also, what would you advise your younger self to do differently if you were to do it over again, if anything?
Yeah. So one thing about myself is I became obsessed with the asset class early on, and I just dove in. So where someone working 40 hours a week, is going to move at a certain pace. I 10x that, because I was, there was 80, 100-hour weeks where I was just flying through as much content as I can get my hands on, and I think that really helped my learning curve. It helped expedite that. Um, and I think that also just attacking new projects with tenacity and with an attitude of hey, the quicker we can get this done, the quicker that we can refinance, the quicker that we can get our investors' capital back to them. We're very hands-on. After a new acquisition, it comes in house, and we you know I think that differentiates us from a lot of other operators that may have a slower approach. So I think that makes us different.
All right. Well, this has been really insightful, Andrew. I really appreciate your time. Where can people find out more about you and your platform and business? And also, importantly, what are you looking to do next, and how can folks help you with that?
Yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, maybe they have questions about the business, or they're interested in investing passively in mobile home park acquisitions, they can check out my website. That is keelteam.com. That's KEELTEAM.com, and fill out the contact form, or set up a consult with me so we can chat one-on-one. Also, if you're interested in, you find a mobile home park deal and you're interested in bringing it to the table and doing like a joint venture on that deal, I do several of those as well. And if anyone wants to help out, that's how I would say is to find mobile home park deals, and bring them to me, and just for finding a deal, we can partner and make that deal a cash cow for us.
Awesome. And by the way, do you have a like a minimum check size for syndication investors who may be interested in co-investing with you?
Yeah, our minimum is 50,000.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time again. It's been really insightful. I've really enjoyed learning about how you think about the asset class and some of your experiences in it, and can't wait to share this with our audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.